All right. So Ryan, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Great. And I think Jody Vogel is on the call as well, who's the chair of the program committee. So Jody, feel free to chime in if you want to lend some context or more program committee influence in this. So let's get started. So this is about a 20-minute presentation. One time we did this, it just went 20 minutes, no one had any questions. And then yesterday we ran about 40 minutes or so. So the more questions you have, the more engaging we can be with examples, the better that this will go. But we're gonna run through a lot of what we see and the conversations that we see out of the committee of common errors and common really good practices that we see in our didactic submissions. So as far as what we will be talking about today, we're talking about the didactics format. There's a large breadth of people on this call, everyone from medical students up to senior presenters. So we just want to lay the guidelines of, we have both 20-minute and 50-minute formats. And we've really emphasized over the past last 2 years that we are really moving to the adult learning format, being if it is a didactic presentation, if it is a single speaker, that it really should be a 20-minute format, as that is the most engaging way to get that information across. We also have a 50-minute format, which really lends a lot of creativity to the format and a lot of interactivity with the audience, be it discussion groups, flipped classroom, and we'll talk about a lot of that later. There are a number of other formats that SAEM promotes and offers through the meeting, all of which, except for the advanced workshops day, will open after the didactics platform is closed for submissions. So I guess now is the time to reevaluate if didactics is the optimal format for you. But other ones include innovations, which is relatively straightforward. Abstracts, which is everything from posters all the way up to the plenaries, and oral abstracts in between. And then Ignite, which Jean led for several years, which is your lightning format of auto-advancing slides in 7 minutes and high pressure, but really good for kind of the junior performer and presenter who wants to get out there and trial their presentation style in a national meeting. As far as context for what we get as the didactic subcommittee and what we accept as the didactic subcommittee, over the past 2 years, we've had record submissions, and last year was another record at just about 300 submissions. And we aim for, and we'll continue to aim for, about 100 acceptances overall. All of these, most of these, the vast majority of these submissions are really high quality. So just because your submission is not accepted does not mean that it was high quality. It is a really competitive field with 2/3 not being able to be accepted. And then the platform is open until October 1st. And if you have submitted already, you can go back and edit your content until October 1st. And the platform will be open, but it will close right then. And then the committee will get started the next day reviewing them. And if you have questions anywhere along this, please just type your questions. We can either answer them in real time or we'll kind of keep them in queue until we are done. So you have an idea, you have a niche, you have an area that you would like to present in. We find the best way to really get the best submission is to help collaborate, and the best way to collaborate is through finding a diverse speaker portfolio. The first thing we will ask you, and an additional emphasis this year, is to help us see the expertise that you have to make you be able to speak in this area. So that comes in a couple of forms. It obviously comes in your enthusiasm and history of presentation in the area, but it also comes from your ability to create a diverse and experienced speaker portfolio. So maybe you may not be the best or most experienced speaker in this, but are you able to find the other speakers in the area that may lend yourself a little more expertise, a little more credence? Where we get the question quite a bit of how do you find speakers in your area of expertise, and SAEM has an incredible amount of breadth and depth of experience, and that comes in several different forms, and sometimes it's hard to know where these different forms are. But if you go to the website, you can see the academies, the committees, and the interest groups. So I believe there are 7 academies, even more committees, and even more interest groups going even deeper into the niches of emergency medicine. The benefits are multifold of getting involved and reaching out to these, in that a lot of these committees are tasked with creating didactics, and a lot of these committees come forward with really high quality didactics because they inherently have a high level of collaboration and a high level of oversight and critique within themselves. That being said, by reaching out to them, you also see what is out there already, what are they submitting, and how can your didactic fit into the mesh of what we want to create, which is a really solid and really, really broad didactic content for the meeting. There are also subcommittees in some of these that may be able to actually mentor and give you feedback on your didactic, as well as adding to your speaker portfolio. It is worth mentioning that all of your speakers, A, need to be defined prior to your submission, and B, need to have their conflict of interest named via the website prior to submission, just so that the subcommittee can really make sure that they're dealing with the final product. And if they are not, it always kind of calls into question how well defined and thought out the proposal is. Let's get into the pitch. Let's get into the proposal proper. And that obviously starts with the title. While it seems superficial, it is very much so what people see when they're flipping through the program. And with 100 didactics, and that's only one of multiple mediums in the meeting, it's really important that it stands out. An example of one that could have been last year, there was a didactic looking at how to integrate research into residency didactics, which is a relatively dry topic, but they really did a good job in creating a title in short, deep, and flipped 5 ways to improve your research curriculum that right off the bat catches your eye and gives you a sense for what their tangible objectives are going to be by defining a numeric number of takeaways and something you're going to take back and integrate into your residency program. So it may be superficial. We're looking for good titles, not necessarily hyperbolic titles, and certainly not insincere titles. But the more you can make it stand out, not only will the committee see it more, but it will obviously gain more credence at the meeting when people are flipping through the programs. We will ask you to define 3 to 6 objectives, at least 3 objectives. And this is getting to what the title just got to, which is really defining what are going to be your takeaway messages. And we ask you to define these in action terms. So can people integrate residency didactics into their curriculum? Can they name you the ways of the methods of a flipped curriculum? Can they, we're looking for specific, tangible takeaways. An example of this would be a submission that was accepted last year of, it was a #MeToo objective where they could very much so identify and list takeaway messages from the presentation. And then you get into the meat of it. We will ask 2 separate ways how you're going to create your didactic, one through structure and then one through proposal. So in the structure, we're really asking you to justify how are you going to best utilize the time. And that should be contextualized in, is this a 20-minute or a 50-minute presentation? There is a significant amount of feedback every year given to proposals that are either far too robust and time intensive for a 20-minute elective, and or a single speaker on a single topic, which may not justify a 50-minute didactic, and therefore really breaking down how you're going to use your time on a minute-to-minute basis. So you're going to have a 10-minute introduction, they're going to break into groups for 20 minutes, and then you're going to have a 10-minute Q&A with the panel. Be very, very specific, and even more specific about what the goals of those time segments are. Will really help the committee gain confidence that you have really thought through and been able to justify your time. And then we're looking for innovation. A big way that we see that is through collaboration. It obviously furthers the goal of SAEM and allows for further research and collaboration down the line. And it really makes for some robust interfacility and interdepartmental topics. And then looking for the context of what is the hot topic and how is your presentation going to fit into that context. So a good example of this as far as format is concerned would be one that Judd Hollander and Kristen Rising did last year, which was writing is a very difficult topic to cover in a didactic format. So they actually, after giving a didactic presentation, broke up into small groups and forced people to put pen to paper and actually get some of their ideas down, which took a very mundane topic and flipped it around to make it very practical, very interactive, and justified their time in the didactic. Plus, if you get Judd Hollander on your didactic, that probably helps as well. And then obviously looking for ways to engage. So that would be one, breaking apart into discussion groups. A flipped classroom or sending out materials ahead of time is certainly possible. We have an audience response system. So I think every institution tends to use their own. We use Poll Everywhere. There's a number of proprietary technologies out there. SAM actually has integrated into the presentation software an audience response system, which if you indicate in your submission that you would like to use it, we will be in contact about how to best integrate that into your didactic, as it is a unique system based around Cadmium, which is the submission software. Beyond that, there's a number of very technical AV questions, but it's a common question, so it's worth bringing up in the general forum. Your room will have a computer, will have Wi-Fi, and will have microphones for the presenter. If you need anything above that, so sound presenting to the room, additional microphones or mobile microphones or connectors from your laptop, those you can identify all of those in your actual submission. And if you have any questions, you can either reach out to us now, or as they will probably come up later, just email us at didactics@sam.org. We'd be happy to answer those. So pulling it together, we're almost done, but we really want you to find your niche and to find the context of that niche in the greater academic emergency medicine collaborative environment, and then make it pop, come up with a good title, come up with an innovative way to present it, and really articulate it well. The more context you can use to build your case for why the didactic should be presented, the better it will be seen by the committee. So that's all that we have. Again, the platform is open until October 1st. And if anyone has questions, Jean and I would be happy to answer them. Or Jean, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I'm just going to add some resources at the end here. I'm going to send out a link on the group chat. This is a link to the best practices document, which is on the SAM website. It goes into a little bit more detail about the points that Ryan had just made. It also includes a example of a full submission. So the title, the structure, the content. It's a non-medical legal topic that was accepted last year that we found to be of high quality. So if you want, to see exactly what the style of the writing is and how specific they were, you're welcome to take a look. At the end of the best practices document, there's also a couple links to the didactics from prior years. If you just want to, go through and see what types of topics and what language in their titles and so forth. There's links to the didactics from 2017, 2018, and 2019. And the last point I'll make is, Ryan did a great job of going through kind of the big picture, trying to make things pop, trying to put it in context. I will say that if there's kind of one thing to take away from all this is to have a very specific proposal that looks like it's very well thought out. So, exactly how you use your time, exactly what your objectives are, how your objectives are going to tie in to each of your time blocks, like your intro, whatever you do with the audience, your Q&A. Something that came up in the last talk was, what are some common reasons that proposals don't make it through? And one of them is that you might get a really big national speaker. It's a great name. and they'll send in a proposal that says something like, you know, I'm going to talk about critical care, specifics to be determined. And that's definitely going to be poorly reviewed, even if you have the most incredible speaker lineup imaginable. So try to be very specific, try to be thorough, and that should hopefully get you a high quality submission. So more than happy to answer any questions you might have. Feel free to type them in the chat or use the raise your hand or just unmute yourself.
I guess I'll start. Thanks for doing this didactic. I'm Ryan Pedigo from Harbor. You said we can email you prior to the due date. How like detailed of a review? Should we send you basically an entire submission packet to get feedback on, or how does the feedback before submission work?
So I can give you an initial response, and Ryan, you can jump in as well. So again, we as the didactics subcommittee chairs won't be able to do like a full independent review. The kind of things that we can help with though is you can, you know, let's say you have an idea for something, or you know what your format is, your panel is, and you have a question about, you know, does this seem appropriate for the 20 or 50-minute time slot? Is this the right forum? You know, or if you want to know who to get in touch with to vet your topic or to collaborate, those are the things that we can definitely assist with. If you want someone to do a more thorough review of your proposal, I would suggest that, you know, you can still get in touch with us so that we can refer you to maybe someone who submitted something similar in the past, or an interest group or a committee, who, you know, kind of give you a little bit more context in their experience with this process and what they've done before. But, you know, we won't be able to do kind of our own independent review since we have to remain relatively unbiased. That
Great,
sound right to you? Yeah. And Jody, feel free to jump in too if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think that's
You got a little bit of feedback there. It seems like she's in agreement. So that's good.
No, I think that sounds great.
All right, thank you.
And then another question I have is regarding the request of 20 versus 15 minutes. If you have a lecture that is anticipated to have a large kind of question and answer session, how do you recommend dividing the amount of content versus the amount of time left for questions?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and hard to give you a definitive answer. I would say in a 20-minute session, 5-minute questions should be significant. Obviously, these didactics are very, the rooms are booked one after the other, so we really can't add on time afterwards. Jody, I think that might be Jody's fire alarm or reverb. So I think for a 20-minute session, I think 5 minutes should be significant. I mean, if the intention is really to make it an interactive session, then I think you could certainly justify more Q&A time. I think 5 minutes would probably be the standard for a 20-minute session, and then 10 minutes for a 50-minute session, especially if there was a panel, especially if there was an intended interactive component to it, then I think you could justify more than 10 minutes.
All right, great, thank you. But you did say that single presenter 50-minute submissions are relatively not frowned upon, but not as favorably seen as a group for 50 minutes?
That's correct. I mean, there are certainly exceptions. There are certainly formats and interactive formats where a single speaker could take up 50 minutes. However, it would be the exception rather than the standard.
Great, thank you.
Hi, this is Shulin Tai from Columbia in New York City. I have a question regarding who are the reviewers for didactic submissions. Would it be just the members of the didactic committee?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we have a subcommittee of approximately 30 members, 25, 30 members, each of which review enough that each didactic gets several reviewers, commentary and scores on them, and then they're brought back together. There's obviously flagging and screening for conflict of interest therein. So there's some renegotiation as far as that's concerned. And Gene and I can both give you examples of didactics that we have had rejected while in this position. But that is the overall setup, is 25, 30 members and multiple reviewers per didactic.
And are the submissions then divvied up based on the areas of interest and expertise?
You're saying as far as, are the specific reviewers specialized in that area of expertise?
Yes.
That's a good question. Not specifically. I think that a lot of the content within them is consistent among what we are looking for in quality didactics. There is certainly experts in each area in the subcommittee, such that the conversation will focus around the experts in that area when the subcommittee comes back together. I'm thinking specifically in some of the more obscure research end of things, where Gene is in admin and I'm in medical education, and we know that deep into research is not our forte. We will very much so reach out to the members of the subcommittee that are experts to get their context.
Yeah, the initial round of review is similar to abstracts in that, you know, it's basically just by like random assignment to, you know, try and get as many reviewers as possible on each individual submission. But then there's a second round of review where the entire committee comes together, and that's where people's expertise tends to come out, and we can have like a more in-depth discussion. And then after that, there's actually like an additional layer, sort of executive review between me, Ryan, and Jody to make sure that the content is all consistent with the educational and research missions of SAEM, that, you know, there's some historical context taken into account from prior meetings. We want to make sure everything is balanced. So yeah, so the expertise tends to matter most during the second round.
Right. And once a decision has been made by the committee for 20-minute or 50-minute session, didactic session, is there any room for renegotiation, perhaps, from the authors, submitters to the committees?
Yeah, that is a great question. And there are several didactics each year that we think are really high quality if they were in another format. And we will reach out to those submitters specifically and essentially ask them if they would be willing to revise their submission. If you are willing to be flexible, indicating it, that you think that there would be room to be flexible. The trick is that there should be strong justification for the amount of time that you're having.
Right.
So it's hard to do that for both 20 and 50-minute. However, if you really are flexible, we do that multiple times a year in high quality didactics that we think would be better suited.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Guys, it's Elizabeth Schoenfeld. I had to switch from phone to computer, so I was gone for a second. But I do have a question about 20 minutes versus 50 minutes. Because I think that people probably, there are some topics that are clearly 50 minutes and some topics that are clear 20, but in others that could go either way. Do you think that people will have more luck in one versus the other? Do we have a set number of 20-minute spots and a set number of 50-minute spots, or do we just choose all of them and sort of make them fit? Or do you think that there's some advantage to, you know, shutting it down and making it a little bit tighter, or making it, you know, longer and bigger?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we have, for the past several years, tried to balance them roughly 50-50 between 20-minute and 50-minute. The overriding goal and essence of this is that it should be appropriate for the format. However, 20 minutes are continually emphasized, especially in the single format, and our goal is 50-50.
So their goal is actually 50-50, to have half 20s and half 50s?
Correct.
Okay. And I'm sorry if you just said this, my child just popped into my room. Do we have more 50s than 20s? Because most of the ones that I'm aware of are, people tend towards 50s and are much less likely to go to submit 20s.
I agree. The research end of things always tends to be a little more complex and a little more involved, which tends to lend itself to 50. I agree. We would still like to emphasize the 20-minute format as much as possible.
I think that's great. That's good to know. My other question, and I don't know if you guys know the answer to this, do we have the same attendance at 50s versus 20s? Are people more likely to pop into 20s because they're shorter and it's less of a commitment? I'm just personally curious about this. My own experience is that I'm constantly running around, and so I don't always, so if I'm running late, then forget it, you've missed the 20. Whereas if you're 5 minutes late to the 50, you still can get a lot out of it. And I'd be curious if we happen to know whether 50s are better attended than 20s or vice versa, but I don't know if we know that.
I'm going to buy Jean just a few minutes of time. Jean is the data guru and has some of that information. So we will try to pull that depending on Jean's typing skills for us live here.
Yep, just give me a sec. I actually do have the data for all of last year, so I'm going to get back to you in like 3 minutes and let you know.
And there is certainly an effort to, especially like yourself, people that may be interested in one topic, to keep especially those 20 minutes in the same room, so there's not that running around, because we very much acknowledge that it's hard to run a half mile in the 5 minutes in between sessions.
And are there other sessions where in prior years it's so well received with great feedback and so needed that the didactics are repeated?
Absolutely. They tend to be the topics that are relatively flexible or have a flexible, repeatable model, like Lion's Den, like SAM's Got Talent, like some of the lit blitzes, some things that'll be dynamic between years, but are well received and well attended, tend to be the ones that repeat year after year.
And is that initiated by the submitters, or is that decided by the committee?
The committee uses the success last year's with the new submission. It is not an agreement that those will exist from year to year. However, they are known to be high quality entities that need to resubmit every year and tend to be of high quality and well attended.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There's another question here from James. Thanks, about Pediatric Topics. Pediatric Topics is a request this year in that it will be emphasized. We, certainly I think worse have lacked didactics on pediatrics in the past, and we're really hoping to emphasize that. That being said, there's no specific subtopics that we are looking for. And we have been really excited by the engagement that we've gotten out of the PEDS-EM faculty so far and the level of didactics. So no specific focus. We would love to see whatever your specialty is and whatever you'd like to present on.
So just going back real quick to Elizabeth's question about the attendance for 20 versus 50 minutes. So just looking at the data we have from last year, I don't see like a consistent pattern in favor of one or the other. It seems like both were roughly equally attended, and it seems to be a little bit more gravitated towards certain topics rather than the particular format, whether it was 20 or 50. That's just sort of, my overall gestalt to looking at the data without doing like a statistical analysis. But it seems like it's pretty evenly distributed.
That's great. That's good to know. Thanks.
Yep.
Promise this is my last question. This is Ryan Pedigo again. Are there any historical submissions on more kind of non-medical topics? Like for instance, I talk regionally and like institutionally about loan repayment strategies and like personal finance kind of topics. What are your thoughts on those types of subjects?
Yeah, so I do have data on topics from prior years as well, and I will say that actually, kind of non-clinical or social, sort of medical, legal, whatever you want to call it, these sort of like other topics do tend to get good traction at the meeting, so long as it's pretty high quality, very specific, and framed well. So for instance, the medical legal talk that's on the best practices document is a great example. I believe we have had talks about finances in the past. Maybe I can't think of an example for personal finances, but there's been talks about like budgeting and financial resources for hospitals and stuff like that. That there's certainly room for that if you'd like to submit in that area. I think that is very appropriate.
Great, thanks so much.
Mm-hmm. You can also ask more questions too, if there's no limit per person.
No, that was all very helpful. Thank you.
I have to say, this has been a really great group so far. Thank you guys for participating, and all these questions are fantastic. Does anyone have any other questions that they'd like to ask?
Thanks so much for providing this forum for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are always available, didactics@SAEM.com. We'll get both Gene and myself, and we'd be happy to answer anything that comes up. Or if you look at the platform and have questions about just what goes where, we'd be happy to take a look at it. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing a boatload of submissions on October 1st and getting back to you on some more specifics. So I really appreciate everybody coming out, and look forward to being in touch.
Thank you.